Welcome to another edition of Really, I'm a Grandpa. How are you out there? I'm James Lott Jr. or Papa Jamie today. That is my grandparent name. Like, that's what they call me. And I'm very excited to actually have a guest on the show. Many times I do my own shows and I talk about different topics. But I bring guests on too, folks. I always have a guest on. This person, we're kind of doing a quid pro. Can't get the word out. Folks know I had a birthday. Quid pro quo. That's what we're having. Where I did something for him and I did something for me. So I'll talk about that in a second. I'm gonna read his bio. This is what he has on his page. It quotes what he said. Blank is a storyteller, performer, marketing executive. His nonfiction stories have appeared in Boston Magazine and Boston Sunday Globe magazine. And his book of true family stories, The Willoughby Chronicles, was published by Swallys Press in 2017. This blank person is the co-founder of Captains of Industry, a leading boutique marketing consultancy based in Boston or in Baston. Blank has won a Telly Award, which I know those, for the Institute of Backup Trauma, starring John Cleese. That's a name. Who looks stunning in a red dress. I like that. Blank and his colleagues of Captains of Industry created the climate declaration for CERES, and was
Series.
CERES, and was signed over which was signed by over 1,700 corporations globally, including some small businesses like Apple, Nike, that tiny business Starbucks, GM, and a business that was in San Francisco that I know of, Levi's. Blank lives outside of Boston with his wife Nancy, who he says continues to put up with him after 35 years. They have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. He's not that young, but he's young to me, Mr. Ted Page.
Hello, Jamie. Can I call you Papa today, or should I go with James or Jamie?
You can call it whatever you want. The Good Grandpa, which is also his website, thegoodgrandpa.com. So we can call you whatever you feel, Mr. Page, whatever you feel. Call
All
it.
right. Well, I'll just see where it takes me.
Yeah, so just call me late for dinner. That's all.
Great.
That's all I care. Call me whatever you want. Welcome to the show. Uh,
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
so, folks, I gotta say before we begin, he is actually writing a book about grandfathers. And actually, it's funny, Ted. I mentioned it to several people in my life. They're like, "Yeah, they don't get a lot of attention, do they?" Like grandmothers always, I think deservedly so, get lots of attention. We love them and all this stuff, but grandfathers don't get a lot of attention. So they're excited. So I might have some people who are going to buy the book. They're very excited. But I'm in the book. I'll be in the book.
Yes.
And talked, and I get to see my chapter. So it's coming out soon and all that. We'll talk about you just follow him for that. But congratulations on working on the book that you have coming out. And
Thank
tell
you.
people the concept. So I kind of said it, but tell people what the concept of your book is.
Sure. So I started a blog about 10 years ago when I found out I was going to be a grandfather. And at the time, I was just so blown away. I was just trying to process my experiences. So I had to write about it. I've always done writing as sort of an outlet and for creative purposes. And everything I could find on the web related to grandfathers, and I do mean everything, was the movie Bad Grandpa. And I love comedy. It's just, wasn't what I aspired to. So I called it Good Grandpa and just started, spinning stories and of all kinds of things, ruminations kind of. And then last year, by some miracle, it was featured in the New York Times in this article, like how to be a good grandpa or whatever. And then it had this huge flood of people coming to it, including a literary agent. So he said, I think this could be a book. I think maybe you're right. And then he got me a publisher, who's a terrific publisher. So what it's really about is hearing the stories and gathering the wisdom of grandfathers from all different cultures. So that's here in the United States, hopefully around the world, and putting that together in one book, sort of like a compendium of stories and wisdom for people. And I've just been blown away by some of the stories I've heard, including yours, James. Just I always ask people about their own grandparents and great grandparents and the things that I hear. just knocked my socks off. So this, as far as I know, there hasn't been a book like this. Like I've looked for it. I looked for it 10 years ago. So this is kind of the book that I wished had existed when I became a grandfather.
Yeah.
So that's really what it's about. I have till December to finish the manuscript, and then they'll go from there. But I'm just really enjoying the ride.
Yeah, he asked me about some of my. So, what is one thing you take away from my story that was like you were like, okay, that's very interesting.
So
There were several things I know, but what is one thing?
yeah. So a lot of times in conversation, things come up like two-thirds of the way in. And I find myself saying, can we go back? Can we just talk about that a little bit? So, I'm talking to you and you've got this media company and you're an organizer, you're doing all these really cool things. You became a grandfather at 39. I think I got that right. It's 39. Totally different from my experience. Your grandmother drove a Carmen Ghia. Mine was driving a pink Rambler in the wrong lane in Vermont. I said, wow, this is a really different experience, all this stuff. And then it was this kind of, oh, by the way moment, like 40 minutes in. It's like, yeah. And one of my great grandfathers, he was one of the most prominent, Black professional wrestlers. And he did most of his work in Europe, just to get away from the racism and it was just article in Slam magazine. And then I thought, okay, just hold the presses for a second here. And then like I hear this in this conversation with you, and then I Google it and I find the article in Slam magazine. And like your great grandfather, not only, I mean, you're right. I mean, he's kept out of the record books because of the color of his skin. He had different stage names. He was the Panther. He performed in Germany in 1939, and like a month before the invasion of Poland, stays in Germany. Then he gets arrested by the Germans, and he's in a German prison camp along with other Americans, sort of enemy non-combatants or whatever. And he's starving in this German prison camp. They called him Iron Stomach because he would eat the moldy bread and just do whatever he could to survive.
Yes.
And a guy who was a fellow prisoner in the camp did a caricature of him and others in the camp. And your great grandfather, who went by the name Reginald Seekey, he inscribed it, let's keep going. Let's keep going. It's like, we're going to get through this, right? So that's just amazing stuff. And then he comes back, and he wrestles Gorgeous George, who was like one of the most famous, the blonde bouffant, all this stuff. It's like, you just can't make this stuff up. And then, and I was asking you, like, because I ask all grandfathers when I talk with them, like, what's the number one thing? I call it like the Billy Crystal rule, from the movie City Slickers. What's the number one thing you want the grandkids to know, like your number one wisdom? And you said, you're going to survive this. You are going to survive. Life is multidimensional. It has beauty. It has pain. You're going to survive. I thought, damn, like we're all a product of to some degree, of our family history and our, some there's genes in there, but also our remembrances. And so that kind of story, I just, that's just treasure. That's such a wonderful thing. And just to have that in your life. So that's something that's why I asked that question about, our own grandparents, because there's just things that people haven't thought about in a while that come out. And I think it helps inform how we think about our own lives and how we can think about how we help our grandkids become, the best generation ever.
Because I knew about my most of my great grandparents, and I knew even information about my great great grandparents, some of them. And because we live a long time, my family, in many cases, they live a long time. They drop dead one day, but they live a long time.
Yeah.
And also they're like, we're done. And that's it. But I used to talk to them a lot. When I was a kid, I was so interested in family that I would ask them questions like, what's this? And what happened there? And they would show me pictures and stuff. And I'm glad I did that just because I'm very much an ancestral person. I believe in that, and I think I come from strong stock, clearly. And I feel like that does play a part in who I am. And I love when people say, my family, you remind me of, you're so much like, I mean, in the good ways. I mean, in the bad ways too, but in the good ways, I like that. I like that also.
Yeah.
It's the connection that you have with them. And now I have grandchildren where they'll say, you're just like your Papa Jamie, or you're just like, I see things in me. I go, don't keep doing that because that's how I was. It's like there's stuff in there because I do have teenage grandchildren now. It's
Yeah.
now they're on the verge of adulthood. It's different than just having little kids. I have those
Right.
two. They have the little kids that are starting out, but I have the ones now that are starting to go out in the world beyond this stuff. So it's very interesting to see what personality traits they're taking and decisions. The trip.
Yeah, it's a totally different experience you're having, with the teenage,
Yeah.
or just about to become teenage. My eldest grandson is, he'll be 10 this
Okay.
year, which
Double
unbelievable.
digits. Double digits.
Yeah, double digits, unbelievable. And it was just like the verge of like, when is it going to become not cool to hang out with me? Is that going to happen? Are
Yeah.
they going to be 15? It's like, no, grandpa, I'm not going to, I'm going over to Steve's house, or gonna go see Mary now. It's like, who's Mary? What are you talking about? So we'll see. I love the different experiences people have, and then finding those commonalities too.
It's gonna happen. And what's going to happen though is like just like your kids, they come back around, and it's one of those things that it's they're getting their independence. They're happy to see you when they see you, but yeah, then they're going over to so and so's house to play. It's not so much they want to be with you the whole time, but they're glad you're there, and it's good to see them, and you get your little
Yeah.
moments. But see, now I was thinking the last time I was in Sacramento, that's where my grandkids live, for my older grandkids, and I was in I only have one granddaughter. So I was in, that's my closest person, of course, to me, my girl Scarlett. And on the show, I've talked about it on the show, but I know Scarlett. So
Yeah.
she and I sat in her room with her bad guinea pigs. I hate them. That's another story. Her guinea pigs. She's like, do you want them? Like, no, I don't want them. But then her younger brother Riley, we were just like the three of us were sitting in a room. At one point, my daughter was there, and it was like the three generations having this great conversation. And she went off, and I just had so much fun listening to how they say words. They're Gen Z, I guess, or Gen Alpha, whatever. They have a whole different word language. How they view
Yeah.
things makes me laugh. They know with me they can talk freely in front of me, and that's one thing about being a grandfather is great versus being a father. It's very like I'm not your daddy. You have a daddy.
Yeah.
I'm grandpa, so they know they can talk to me about stuff, and we laugh, and I get in trouble for stuff sometimes. All the time, I say certain things, but I don't care. I'm a grandfather. And but they know, but in the end, what you're gonna find later, which I'm finding out, is that when major things, good or bad, happen, they want to tell you. They know they
Uh,
can come to me and tell me and say, I can
yeah.
talk to Papa Jamie because he won't judge me like that. He'll at least listen. And I've lived enough life that I can give some advice. And my grandparents on my mother's side were exactly the same way with me. I could go to them about anything and I'm just mirroring what happened to me. I could go to them and they had various experience. And, and I mean, I swear my grandpa Bob was part of the mob, but he probably wasn't, who knows. But all the Italians knew him in New York. He spoke like them. They called him Roberto. He had a cigar in his mouth all the time. But like he lived some life and I got to learn some things. He was like, when I had my first girlfriend, he was just like telling me all kind of stuff that Bob actually should have heard, but who knows?
Yeah.
But he was passing on grandfather wisdom in his own hilarious New York grandpa kind of way. So I kind
Yeah.
of made myself the same way, kind of.
Yeah. I think when you talk about your grandpa Bob, was he the one who was like he had really nice suits, and it's
Oh,
like,
oh yes. Oh my, he big tipper. Oh, he
yeah,
tipped big everywhere he went.
he would go to the Playboy Club, and
Yes.
he was like living the life. And
Yes.
that's just something that I'm sure that you picked up on, because you're living the life that you want. That's the impression I got. You know what I mean? It's like you had this epiphany in your career where you hated your job, you hated going into the city you're in. And I'm going to change everything. And you did.
Mhm.
Like there's a lot of people who decide that, and they don't, by the
I
way.
know. Yeah, I know. I
And
know.
they just live this absolutely miserable life. But I suspect, it's like you remember Grandpa Bob and your own family, and it's like, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this now. Reginald Seekey, like, how many barriers did he have in his life? And he said, fuck you. This is what I'm doing. Right. And if he didn't accept him in Madison Square Garden, he was in Czechoslovakia and Hungary, and he made a name for himself, and he made a living, and he became this guy.
Yeah.
So that's why I just, and I hear similar things. I mean, very different, but just similar kind of threads in people's lives. And that is one of the most fascinating things is like a lot of people, not you, but a lot of people think like, yeah, that happened a long time ago, but that has nothing really to do with me. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like grandfather fought in the First World War. It's like, well, whatever. It's like an old photograph in an album. But I keep finding these threads that tie us together, not just in like wisdom, but like experiences. And like I was talking to one guy, he happens to be he's been running the head of the Charles Regatta in Cambridge for 20 years. Like he helped make this regatta what it is. His name is Fred Schock. He's a great guy. And I'm talking to him and he says, so my dad was one of the boys in the boat. You know the book, The Boys in the Boat,
Yeah.
but that, yeah. He was on the team that went to Berlin in, 1936, 1939 rather. And he was an alternate, but he had apparently his claim to fame was that he was filming the team with, during the race where they won the gold medal, and he was standing in Hitler's way, and he was asked to get out of the way of Hitler's view. And I thought, that's interesting. It's
That
like,
is.
I wish a lot more people had stood in Hitler's way in
Right,
1930.
exactly.
But
Exactly.
yeah, but he was really influenced by rowing. It wasn't just in that 1939 Olympics. Like his dad was like a rowing coach at Princeton, influenced him, and then he started rowing and he practiced with him and the Olympic trials, and then he went on to mentor so many kids who've become rowers, professionally or just in college, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like echoes, these generational echoes that I just find fascinating.
Will you be adding your story in there?
So it's funny you should ask that because I weave in some of my story, like because I had the blog for 10 years. So a lot of my own experiences are lead intro into a larger thing.
Okay.
Like I have a chapter, it's called A Lab of Her Own. And it's all about how, I have two granddaughters. I want them to have the same opportunities as my two grandsons in whatever they want to go into. It could be science or whatever. But it starts with, my dad being a scientist and having our own chemistry lab in the basement, but my elder brother, making homemade bombs in the chemistry lab. We all thought he was the Unabomber when that happened later because he blew up so much shit in high school.
Oh my God.
And there was an experience I had because my dad, he really wanted to encourage us in science. So he gave me this big magnifying glass and I took it with me to like fourth grade. And it was a really sunny day. And I thought, wow, if I just shine this light through this, like 7-inch wide magnifying glass, it creates this intense heat, which I then put on the kid's sneaker of the boy in front of me. Uh, and this plume of smoke starts rising up, and I got into all kinds of trouble. But that's just sort of a little anecdote, but then it leads into, okay, how do we help this generation of girls, do this? So that's part of my story, but there's also going to be probably a chapter I'm just sort of formulating in my head, which is the title of the chapter is This is the chapter I swore I wasn't going to write.
Got it. Okay.
Because I had publishers, like Penguin talk with me, and they said, well, we want it to be like a how-to book. And I said, I don't really want to do a how-to book. I just want to tell stories and people can have their own takeaways. And I still don't want to have a how-to chapter, but I want to have something that's like a compendium of things that I've heard
Okay.
that influence me. Because I found in the process of doing this that I've set out to see how I could change this generation, these young kids, help them have their greatest lives. But what it's doing is changing me the more I learn. I didn't expect that, right?
Yeah.
How did this process change me? And what are the takeaways from that I would want people to know? So there's going to be that aspect of
All right. Because like I was one of those the last chapter. And me. It's what happened to me, my grandfathers.
it.
That's cool.
Good.
So you're 10 years a grandfather.
Yes.
Here's a blog. And so because we do talk age on here, so how old were you when you turned a grandfather?
I was 55.
Which is funny because I just turned 55 this
That's
weekend.
right. You are a very young grandpa.
But
Still,
but
you're
but here,
still
but see, here's what's I'm about to praise you for a second. So folks at home, look at him. I would not guess he was over that he was like 65 years old. I would not guess that at all. Whatever that means, I would not guess. I would thought you were around my age, actually. So you hold up pretty well.
anyone, by the way, listening to this, anyone who says that to me, I buy the drinks for them
Yeah.
forever, forever.
But
So
seriously, you look great.
thank you so much.
I look half decent in 10 years.
Yeah,
Hold
James, when I'm in LA, you pick the bar, and
on.
it's all on. Just say, here, Ted, here's my card. Just take care of James here.
I like whiskey drinks. But no, but my thing is, you do look great for you look great. So I like
Thank
to
you.
say that for anybody who's watching. I would never guess that. So we normally do younger grandparents, but I bring him on because he's a good grandpa. I still want him on the show. He's my friend. Um, but even at 55, okay, so I became a grandfather for the fourth or fifth time at 53 and no 52 and 54. So close. I mean, still, again, this time period. I mean, I thought I was almost done, but I had another daughter had decided to get married and have kids herself. She waited later, obviously, to have kids. And so it's interesting for me. I want to ask you because I know my concerns a little bit of being this age because I was being a young grandpa. I was able to do everything with the kids, and it was no big deal. Now a little older, not as in shape as I was. So how do you feel as you're because you're like a true definition of that grandpa we always think about back in the day. You know, you like say you look great, but any concerns about that as they start to enter teenage years and you're in your 60s and 70s? Any thoughts of that?
I'll tell you a brief story that will tell you that will
Please tell it.
kind of
Tell it.
sum it up. So my daughter was a good friend with this girl who happened to be from a Greek American family, and her dad is named Tony Galicis. So I bumped into Tony a couple of years ago, and he is a grandfather now. And he says, "How you doing?" You know, and he's got this big, very thick Greek accent. I said, "Good, good, good." The grandkids are great, and I said, my goal is I want to hike mountains when these kids have kids. I want to hike mountains with my great grandchildren. And he said, "So, Ted, what mountains are you climbing now?" And I made some bullshit excuse. And I said, "Well, my left foot, I've had this problem. So I got to get some custom hiking boots for that." And he just looked at me and says, "You're not going to make it." So um, that may be a chapter I write in the book, which is called "What Mountains Are You Climbing Now?"
That's a great title, actually. It's a great.
Yeah. Because it's true. So I did get custom hiking boots. I spent
Oh,
a
okay.
fortune on custom hiking boots, and I started hiking again. I go for walks. I ride a mountain bike. I swim 3 or 4 days a week. Do outdoor swimming. Um, all of the all of the tips for living longer are out there. It's no secret anymore. So our grandparents, like the grandfather I knew, he was not an exerciser. He did a lot of chores. He did work. It was a farm in Vermont. But we have a lot more available to us, and everything I've seen in terms of how we can not only enjoy our lives with our grandkids, but also be there for them. Like that's a real so important just to be there, to physically be there in whatever way we can. There's a lot of long distance grandparenting going on, but the more years we have, um, the more chance that we can share what we know and that we can have a positive influence on those who are now pushing soggy Cheerios around their high chair trays or learning how to ride bikes and so forth. I knew my grandfather, one grandfather died when he was young. The other I knew through all my formative teen years, and he had a huge influence on me. He lived, he was like mid 80s when he passed away. So that is a goal. You have to recognize that there's more life behind us at 65 than ahead of us. But at the same time, the more we can take care of ourselves physically and emotionally, the more chance we have of, getting to 100 and then dropping dead versus,
Yeah.
like my goal is not necessarily to live to old age. My goal is to live absolutely to the max every single year and every day, like today. I don't have bad days anymore. I have days that are less good,
Yeah.
but I don't know if this is your experience, but or other people's experience. I just my life changed when I became a grandfather, and I know that may sound like overstating things, but like when I'm with these kids, it's like this fountain of youth. I feel like I'm 10 years old again because I'm like playing with these toys. I'm doing Legos, and so I worry about old age, all that stuff. But I get so much youth out of just being around them. It's such a source of happiness for me that I don't think about it. Like the last thing I'll say about this, and I'll stop. But Thomas Jefferson said, "I'm an old man, but I'm a young gardener." So that's what I am as a grandfather.
I like to know. I agree with you. I being a grandparent is just it's so much fun. And the kids are just my grandkids are all very interesting. They're all very different.
Yeah,
And like I said, I have one girl and four boys. So the girl is very different than all the boys. And I just know that for me, because the topic of great grandparenting that came up for me recently, because they're like, well, you have several kids who biologically could have children. And I went, my daughter becomes a grand. Like it's so weird to me. Like I was like, I don't think I'm ready for that just yet. But in my family purview, that can happen very
yeah,
easily. But my
yeah,
oldest grandson says he doesn't want to have kids. Him and his girlfriend both didn't want to have kids. So I don't know if that's going to stick or not. But so far, he was like, no, we don't want kids, which is happening more and more now. There are a lot of people choose not to have kids, and I was like, so I want to clear with him. Then I have my granddaughter, who's she's single and still not there yet. And my other grandson, who will be, they're both teenagers. I'm like, that'll be interesting to see what they do. But right now, the oldest one who could have children for me has
yeah,
chosen not to. So the opposite. And he found
yeah,
a girl who felt the same way,
yeah,
same age, which is kind of like, oh, that's interesting. They actually told me at a dinner, at a lunch, we went up for lunch. They're like, Papa Jamie, you have nothing to worry about. You'll just have fur great grandchildren, all furry. I love fur. I love fur.
yeah,
And so it's kind of interesting. They kind of announced that to me. I was like, okay, well, we'll see what happens. And I said, there's no rush anyway. You're young. There's no rush. Don't take your time.
yeah,
But the great grandparent conversation has come up because my family, we all start young. My mother's a great grandmother. And so that's what's so funny.
yeah,
I got her for Mother's Day a bag that said, you're a good mom, grandmom, and great grandmother.
right.
My mother's only 73. So it's kind of like, that's kind of the whole, it's like, we just, my great grandmother had my grandfather at 15. I mean, that was just kind of how they did back then.
Yeah. I,
Maybe,
just hearing you say like, wait, I'm not ready for this. I had that feeling actually. I'm happy we're talking about it. When I found out I was going to be a grandfather, there was that part of me that thought, what? I'm
yes.
not ready for this. And it's like, and it's like, oh, and it just kind of reminded me of, there's some things you control and some things you
Right.
absolutely cannot control. It kind of reminded me of Jurassic Park, where the dinosaurs get out of the park
Yeah.
and then they start reproducing, and then it's everything. It's
Yeah.
just down from there. But yeah, the dinosaurs get out of the park, and then they do what they're gonna do.
I think the thing for me, Ted, was that I am growing up I knew I wanted to have kids. I think it's a normal, regular thought. Like I'm gonna grow up, have kids. And for me at the time, marriage was part of it. I wanted to get married, have kids. The whole thing didn't happen that way. But the way is, that was my growing up. I wanted that to happen. Grandparenthood just never was a part of that. I don't think for most of us, not part of that thought. I think after you have kids, you're busy raising the kids, trying to
Yeah.
get them to 18, trying to get them to college or whatever. Then it's like later, then you kind of think about grandparenthood on some level, like it kind of hits after a while, but even after a while, then too, I've noticed people usually after they've been in college for a while, they do this, like it's not a thought growing up that I want to be a grandfather. I never said that in my entire. I don't know anybody ever says that in their growing up
Yeah.
life. I want to be a dad. Yeah. I want to be an uncle. Sure. I want to be
Yeah.
a grandpa, a grandfather, a grand. I never. And so when it happened for me at a young age, that's all that story. I've told that story on the show, so we're going to listen to that episode. It was traumatic, and so
Yeah.
I've done episodes of this show about dating while being a young grandparent and having kids. I was still raising my second daughter while I was becoming. It's a whole host. I've had people on the show talk about where they're still raising the kids, and now they're a grandmother at the same time, raising the grandchildren with the children. And this is your uncle, but your uncle's 2 years older than you. Like it's a whole.
Yeah.
That's my experience, and I know some people have that same experience. So it's kind of crazy.
Do you find this different among, women, moms, that they have a greater desire to become grandmothers than men who come out and say, "Hey, I want to be a grandfather"? Do you see a gender difference there in women being more eager about becoming grands?
Great question. I'm trying to think of all people I've talked to over the years. I think it's and I'll make sure I carry this is my experience, folks listening to this. My experience is it depends on culture and age of the person. Because I've known people who are becoming grandparents, they're like, don't call me grandma. They're not into that.
Yeah.
But then I've had know people who once they're in their 60s, possibly 70s, are like, where are the grandchildren? I know
Yeah.
a lot of Black Latina mothers who are like that. They're like, "Where are the grandkids?" Now I'm ready. Now I'm ready for the grandkids.
Right.
But I noticed if you're a little younger, almost everybody's like, "We weren't ready for it. Don't call me grandma. My name is grandma, just ma, that ma. I'm mama, whatever." They just like it's a big. It's like a no. So it's a little bit. It's been age of becoming a grandparent and also culture, a little bit of culture.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because
I,
I know some cultures are like, okay, you go well, let's say you go to school, go to college, then you find the girl, marry her, and have kids. That could be your late 20s. You could be in your late 50s, 36 by
yeah.
that kind of thing.
I have noticed more women saying, in one way, shape, or form to their kids, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill you. Like I'm going to strangle you by the neck until you're dead, and then you won't be able to have kids because I've been waiting all this time. It's like they're the only ones I hear saying that, but they tend to be like later 50s, early 60s
Yeah,
or
I'm saying
whatever.
this later on. It's like later on they go, now I want
Yeah,
kids.
it's like, okay, now I'm ready. Right.
I'm ready.
And then there's also on the other end of the spectrum, there's like some men, not all, but there's a perceived stigma, like, oh, you're old now. Like, I don't know if I told this story when we talked before, but like, I had my own agency. We had an office in Boston, all these employees, whatever. Every day I would meditate once a day. It was very kind of Californian of me in the middle of Boston, but that's, I always did transcendental meditation once a day. First grandkid comes on the scene, I start handing out, showing photos to the staff, they're all in their 20s and 30s. One day I'm in my office meditating, and I hear from behind the door, "Where's Ted?" And then I hear someone say, "Grandpa's having a nap."
Please tell me that story.
And I thought, okay, that's what's going on here, you know? I don't think it's a coincidence that there are multiple books and tons of blogs by grandmothers,
Mm-hmm.
and more power to them. They're out there, they're
Right.
blogging, they're telling their stories. Um, to this day, I mean, I met you, you're doing this podcast, which is great. There's Greg Payne, who you know, who does a cool grandpa podcast. Like, that's it. I don't know anyone
Well,
else.
I was on my show. I've had the ripped grandpa.
The ripped grandpa.
You got to check out an episode of that. He's a bodybuilder, nutritionist. Him and his wife, the ripped grandma. They're proud grandparents, but they're all about fitness. So check him out.
I will check him out. He will never have me on his show. The only thing I ever rip is like my buttons,
Hey,
you
right,
know,
exactly. But he was
pants.
on my show, and he was a trip. He was a personality. He was a trip. He was like,
Yeah, no, I love it. I just love hearing about more. It's not a big grandpa sphere out there, you
no,
know. There's
there isn't. There
quite a
isn't.
good grandpa sphere, but it's some but that's my perception. I don't know. I mean, do you think there's some element of stigma, like, oh, now you're over the hill, that feeling
Yes,
sometimes?
yes. No, for men, you think be for women, but women
Yeah,
have more of an instinctual thing. Especially if they have daughters, they want to see daughters have
yeah,
kids, the whole thing.
yeah,
But men, we don't think that way. Again, I've never heard any man go, "I want to be a grandpa." I've never heard any man say that. I never said it. When it happens, we're fine with it. I think on some level,
yeah,
we just don't. I think it's because with men, it's that whole thing of us, especially when we're in our 40s and 50s, of trying to stay young, trying to stay hip, trying to, in general, some folks, I mean, I don't have to worry about that, but losing their hair, it's a main thing for men. For men, that's an Achilles heel. It's
yeah,
a very much a losing. I have my best friends is he's actually only 38, lost his hair at 21. That's been a
yeah,
big part of his whole life. So there's always that thing of trying to keep up appearances for men. How do I, I know the dad bod's in now, that kind of stuff, but before that, that wasn't in before either. It's like, how can I stay looking as young as I can? Everybody thinks it's women, folks, but men, we're vain as F. We are
yes,
vain fucks out
yeah,
there, and we are trying to hold on to whatever piece of whatever we got. And so already being a dad is one thing, and our kids
yeah,
are getting older. That's already one thing. But
yeah,
add grandpa into that, and it's like it is kind of said like a derogatory slur, so to speak. You're like, but it's not. It's wonderful. But
yeah.
we're not kicking and screaming. We're kicking and screaming going into it. We're not really like just like excited to be there.
I decided to go in the opposite direction of trying to hide my grandfatherhood, you know, just totally get out there with the blog. I started putting like stories on LinkedIn and like professional profiles. Says, folks can have whatever perception they want, but this is what I'm doing. And, you know, I don't know. I think my career is better than it ever was, but everyone has their own experience, right? I don't know.
But
I
that's why I
can't,
started a podcast. And I
yeah,
said the face of the grandparent is changing actually, because
yeah,
half my siblings, we all have grandkids. We're all in our 40s and 50s. Just
yeah,
happens our kids. Several of my cousins who are in their 50s have grandkids now,
yeah.
who are and heading towards having great grandkids. Like we're already the grandparent is changing, and I keep meeting people and finding yeah it is it's getting younger and younger. And like you said earlier, and we're living longer and longer. So
Yeah.
more generations are lasting. At one point, we had 7 generations at one point on one side
Wow.
of the family, and everybody was thriving. Like everyone was doing it. Nobody was just let out. Everybody was thriving. But then
Yeah.
one by one over the years, they kind of went. So now we're down to my mom on both sides. My father on one side, mother on the side. Yes, we have four now. We're down to four.
Yeah.
But we had seven at one point, 6, 7 at one point for a long time until I was in my 40s. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's when my great grandmother died, then my grandmother died, then my great they all started. Sorry, my grandparents they all started dying one by one
Yeah.
over a 10-year period.
Yeah.
And aunts and uncles too. They all that whole generation is almost all gone now, basically for me on one side of the family. I'm like
Yeah.
one of the elder statesmen now. It's kind of weird. Like, how me my cousins how we come,
Yeah.
but that's it's I did this podcast because there are other grandparent podcasts out there. But I said, how can I be different? And why I'm successful is because I chose the niche of younger. And also to talk topics that like I said, the rip grandpa or dating or stuff that still affects us. Work. Many of us grandparents are not retired, crocheting on the couch,
Yeah.
grandpa sitting in the corner with a pipe. That's not what happened all the time. We're still out there making our dreams come true.
Yeah. The still word I hear a lot is you're still working, I hear. You're
Yeah.
still doing this. So yes, I am still doing this.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you can ever, I don't know. The whole idea of retirement, I don't see ever doing that. Just because I'm a writer, it's
Right,
like what painter stops painting, I mean, the
right.
musicians stop playing. It's, oh, I'm 70 now. I'm going to stop playing. It's like, no, it doesn't
I,
work that way.
I said the other day, I could be like Andy Rooney on 60 Minutes. Wheel me in front of a computer and a camera. I can still do a show as long as I have my cognitive functions. He was 99. I mean, like you still do a show. I guess that's the whole thing. It's like I have a business profession that I'll never retire from. I can't see myself retiring unless I have a huge illness or something that throws me off. But other than that, I
Yeah.
don't think I will be retiring either. And that's a common thing now with our generations. The younger boomers, Gen X, the elder millennials. I don't think any of us will be retiring. I think most of us will just be working until just don't anymore.
Yeah. But I think it's also, I've read anyway, that there is just a wave of folks in their mid 60s who are just changing careers, just
Yeah,
doing something else. So
yeah,
that could be a path for me because, this is my second book, but this is more, it's going to be distributed by Simon and Schuster. So maybe
yeah.
someone should buy it, and maybe I can have a different career as a, book writer.
You never
But
know.
I'm still gonna, I get up every day and I write, it's like my theme song is Elvis Costello. Every day I write the book. And whenever I feel a little down, it's like, oh, I got to go back to my desk. It's like, no, this is what I'm doing. Got to write today, every day.
I love that. Actually, I love that song. That's the '80s are the best music, folks. That's good. No, that's good. I think I like you because you have a very nice demeanor. I think you're very cool. I want to thank you for being on my show.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the book. Exactly, it's coming out. And folks at home, I'll let you know when all that goes on. I'll let you know exactly when you can find it. We'll be back on again talking about it. So we'll do.
Yep, that'll be in probably the second half of 2025.
Perfect.
And if there's any grandfathers out there who want to contact me, just go to the Good Grandpa blog. This is my plug at the end here. But it's got my contact form. I just love talking to people who have stories and want to share. Um, so I'm just hearing some great things, but I can't do this book alone. I'm not that writer. This is lots of interesting people. Your story is fantastic. I can't wait to get it out there. Um, but it's a community, and then that's where I get my creative inspiration. So thank you very much for having me on.
Of course. I want to give a shout out to feedspottoday.com, who says we're one of the top 21 best grandparent podcasts out there, because we are. And thank you for always featuring our podcast every week in your publication. That's feedspottoday.com. Always check them out. Always give them a shout out. Also, this podcast is every streaming audio service you can think of, from iHeartRadio to Amazon. I think Google's done doing podcasts, so screw them. But also Deezer and Spotify, and iHeartRadio. We are there under Really, I'm a Grandparent. And that is part of Really Saturdays. We have Really, I'm a Grandparent, the Really Short Story Podcast, the Really Short Coffee Stories, and of course, the Really Quick James Lott Jr. Show. Every Sunday, anything has to do with Really, we release it on this channel, especially the granddaddy of them all, I call it, YouTube, JLJ Media. So follow us over there too. And again, follow him at thegoodgrandpa.com, and we'll talk to you and see you next time.